They sent us a bill for our own son. Commander Eva Rostova held the data slate, its cold weight a poor anchor in the swirling disbelief of the bridge. Before her, the main screen showed the Inder system, a gentle yellow star cradling its single habitable world. The emissary from the Gilded Court, a being of polished chrome and shimmering light, had just departed, leaving behind an invoice that was equal parts absurdity and existential threat. At stake was not just the sovereignty of the Inder, a fledgling space-faring species, but the very definition of justice in this quadrant. Rostova knew this was not a matter for weapons, but for a reckoning, a full public inquiry before the star courts of the Accord. The invoice was itemized with chilling precision. Solar radiation mitigation, it read, followed by a string of numbers that would beggar a dozen systems. Navigational hazard buoy placement unsolicited was another line item. Cultural uplift assessment was the most insidious of all. The Gilded had performed these services without consent, and now presented the Inder with a bill for their continued existence. They called it a gratitude tithe, a perpetual tax on the privilege of being assisted. It was slavery by ledger. Nomos, Rostova said, her voice steady despite the tremor of anger in her chest. Run a full legal precedent analysis. Focus on non-consensual contracts and the Accord's articles on systemic coercion. The air around her shimmered as the fleet-minded Nomos processed her command. Its synthesized voice, a calm cascade of harmonized tones, filled the quiet bridge. Analysis initiated, Commander. Preliminary findings suggest the Gilded Court operates within a gray area of Accord law, exploiting the benevolent intervention clauses. This was a war fought with fine print. Her executive officer, Jian Li, stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. They're loan sharks, Eva. They dress it up in legalese, but they're breaking a people's back for a service they never asked for. He gestured to the screen where a gilded collection vessel, a needle of gold and black, hung in silent orbit over the Inder homeworld. Its presence was a constant crushing pressure. We can't let this stand. Rostova looked from Jian to the invoice. The Gilded weren't pirates. They were accountants, and their weapon was a sanctimonious sense of entitlement. You do not fight accountants with torpedoes. You fight them with auditors. The Inder delegate, a being of chitin and soft-spoken grace named Cathar, had pleaded with them before Rostova had ordered the Gilded emissary off her ship. He spoke of fields lying fallow and children going hungry to meet the tithe's energy requirements. The Gilded took their payment directly from the planet's power grid, a slow, parasitic drain that was bleeding the world dry. The Inder had no weapons to fight a war, but more importantly, they had no standing in the complex legal arenas where this battle must be won. That was why the ESV Principia was here. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, but it had learned quickly that power was not just measured in fleet strength. Real power was the ability to set the terms of the argument. Tasso. Their entire legal framework is built on a logical fallacy, Rostova mused, pacing the command deck. They presuppose that their assessment of a civilization's needs is infallible, and that this infallibility grants them the right to act, and therefore the right to be compensated. Nomos's synthesized voice responded instantly. Correct, Commander. Their argument is a recursive loop. We helped you because you needed help, and the proof you needed help is that we helped you. It is structurally unsound, yet has not been successfully challenged. No one had challenged it because the Gilded chose their targets carefully, young species, isolated worlds, those without a voice in the Accord. The weak were made to be grateful. Before they had entered the Inder system, the Principia had orbited a dead world, a former client of the Gilded Court. The planet was a husk, its atmosphere stripped, its oceans boiled away. The Gilded archives, publicly available as a testament to their efficiency, listed the cause as tithe default. They had repossessed the planet's energy infrastructure and in doing so had silenced a civilization. Rostova had made the crew watch the archival footage. She needed them to understand that the Gilded ships were not just collectors, they were executioners cloaked in the robes of jurisprudence. The debt is the sentence, and the sentence is death. A young ensign in the civilian observation dome light years from Indra watched the data scroll on her personal screen. She saw the tithe numbers, the energy quotas, the dwindling life sign readings from the planet below. Her grandfather had been an economist on Earth, a man who fought predatory lenders. He'd taught her that some debts were designed never to be paid. She saw his face in the plight of the Indra, a quiet echo across the stars. This was the same old evil, just with a much bigger sky. "Jian," Rostova said, turning to her XO, "prepare a formal petition to the Accord. We are challenging the Gilded Court's standing under the sovereignty mandate. Cite their actions at Indra as a primary example of systemic predatory expansion." Jian's expression hardened with resolve. "They will try to hurry us in motions and procedural delays." Rostova nodded. "I know. And Nomos will handle the paperwork. Your job and Lieutenant Kalin's is to prepare for a different kind of engagement." Lieutenant Kalin, her tactical officer, met her gaze from across the bridge. He was a man of action, more comfortable with targeting arrays than legal briefs. But he understood the shape of this fight. "Kalin, I want a full energy audit of the Gilded collection vessel," Rostova ordered. "I don't want to know its weapon strength. I want to know its power consumption, its efficiency ratings, its energy bleed. I want to know what it costs them to simply sit here." Kalin blinked, surprised by the request, but his fingers were already flying across his console. "Aye, Commander. Running a passive spectral analysis now. We'll have their entire energy profile mapped within the hour." This was the first step. To win, she didn't need to prove the Gilded were evil. She had to prove they were inefficient. Nomos's voice cut through the low hum of the bridge. "Commander, the Gilded vessel is hailing us. The emissary wishes to speak with you again. They state it is a matter of clarifying the terms of gratitude." Rostova allowed herself a grim smile. On screen, the shimmering form of the Gilded emissary designated Proctor Varn appeared. It floated in the center of its own pristine bridge, a picture of serene authority. "Commander Rostova," it chimed, its voice like polished glass. "We trust you have counseled the Indra to meet their obligations. A demonstration of our collection efficacy is scheduled for the next cycle. It would be unfortunate if they were to resist. The velvet glove always hides an iron hand." "Proctor," Rostova replied, her tone as cool and unyielding as the void outside. "We are a signatory to the Galactic Accord, as are you. As such, we have formally petitioned for an open inquiry into the legality of the gratitude tithe, citing your operations here as a violation of the sovereignty mandate." The light within the proctor seemed to flicker for a moment, the only sign of its surprise. "An inquiry on what grounds we are providing a valuable service. The Indra are flourishing under our guidance." Rostova's eyes narrowed. "The Indra are starving, Proctor, and we will prove it in open court. We will see you in the corridor of law." She had drawn the line not in the sand, but on the public ledger. The proctor's form seemed to contract, its polished surface momentarily losing its luster. "This is an act of aggression, Commander. You are interfering with a lawful contract." "There is no contract," Rostova countered. "Only coercion. We will let the arbiters decide. Until then, you will cease all collection activities. Any attempt to draw power from Indra will be considered a hostile act against a protected party pending inquiry. She was bluffing, but only slightly. The Accord frowned on direct intervention, but it frowned even more on actions taken while a legal challenge was active. The Gilded's adherence to the letter of the law was their greatest strength, and she would turn it into a weapon against them. Law is a cage, and they had just helped her build it. The transmission ended abruptly. Jian let out a long, slow breath. They didn't expect that. They're used to their targets being too intimidated to even file a complaint. Rostova nodded, turning away from the screen. They've grown arrogant. They believe their own rhetoric. That's the weakness we will exploit. The first move had been made. Now came the waiting and the preparation. The corridor of law was not a physical place, but a procedural state, a hyper-focused legal battleground where evidence was presented and arguments were dissected under the cold, impartial gaze of Accord arbiters. It was a place where empires could be humbled by a single, well-reasoned argument. This is where truth became a weapon. Days turned into weeks. The gilded vessel remained a silent golden threat, but it did not draw power from the planet below. Rostova had won the first small victory, a stay of execution. During that time, Nomos compiled a mountain of evidence. It cross-referenced the Gilded's public records with astronomical data charting their expansion. It analyzed the economic decline of every world they had assisted. The pattern was undeniable. A brief initial surge in technological or social metrics, followed by a long, slow, inexorable decline as the tithe choked the life from their civilization. It was a perfectly engineered parasitism. Kalen's energy audit of the gilded vessel produced a critical piece of information. The ship was a marvel of engineering, but its primary function, projecting the mitigation fields and other services, was incredibly inefficient. It bled energy into space at a prodigious rate. More than that, the technology it used was deliberately proprietary and non-transferable. The Gilded weren't teaching their clients to fish. They were providing the fish, and the cost of delivery was bankrupting the customer. They were selling a cure that was worse than the disease. A message from Cathar, the Inder delegate, brought a fresh wave of urgency. He described a child looking up at the golden ship in the sky. She didn't see a marvel of engineering or a symbol of a galactic power. She saw the reason her family couldn't afford to power the hydroponic farms. She saw a monster. The Gilded had made themselves the sun in the Inder sky, but it was a sun that only took and never gave. The fight was not for legal principle alone. It was for the right of a child to look at the sky without fear. The Accord has accepted our petition, Nomos announced one cycle, its voice cutting through the tense quiet of the bridge. The corridor of law is convened. The Gilded Court will present its case first. We will follow. An arbiter prime has been assigned. Rostova felt a knot in her stomach tighten. This was it. The moment of truth. The Gilded were masters of this arena. They had centuries of precedent on their side, a web of legal arguments so dense and self-referential that it was almost impossible to unravel. But Rostova had something they didn't. She had the truth. And the truth, when properly presented, was the sharpest blade of all. Jian, what's the mood on the lower decks? Rostova asked, keeping her eyes on the star chart. The crew is on edge, Commander, he admitted. They understand the stakes. They've seen the files on the other Gilded clients. They're ready to fight, but they're not sure what fighting looks like in this context. That was the challenge. To teach a crew trained for combat that the most devastating weapon in their arsenal was a well-formed question. To teach them that justice was a verb. The Arbiter Prime was a xylos, a crystalline entity that communicated in pure, unadulterated logic. It was an excellent draw for their case. A Xylos would not be swayed by appeals to tradition or authority. It would see only the structure of the argument. The Gilded case presented by Proctor Varn was a masterpiece of legal sophistry. It spoke of duty, of the burden of the advanced, of the moral obligation to uplift the less fortunate. It painted a picture of the Gilded as selfless guardians reluctantly accepting compensation for their tireless work. It was a beautiful lie polished to a mirror shine. The proctor presented evidence of increased crop yields on Indar in the first cycle after their arrival, a direct result of their solar mitigation field. It showed records of averted asteroid impacts thanks to their unsolicited navigational buoys. It framed the gratitude tithe not as a payment, but as a way for the Indar to participate in their own salvation, to invest in their own security. The argument was seductive. It made the Indar's subjugation sound like a partnership where one partner held all the power and wrote all the rules. Rostova listened, her face impassive. She let the proctor build its case brick by gilded brick. She let the web of self-justification grow, spinning itself into a seemingly unassailable fortress of logic. Jian shifted nervously beside her. "Commander, we should object. He's misrepresenting the data." "No?" Rostova whispered back. "Let him speak. The more he talks, the more rope he gives us." She knew that a lie could only be sustained for so long. Eventually, it would collapse under its own weight. The bigger the lie, the harder the fall. The civilian observer from the mess hall watched the proceedings on a communal screen. He was a cook, a man who dealt in simple, honest things: heat, ingredients, sustenance. He heard the proctor talk about normalized resource allocation and optimized energy distribution. He knew what those words really meant. He'd seen the hunger in the eyes of the Indar refugees they'd brought aboard. It meant empty plates. It meant a child crying itself to sleep. The Gilded could dress it up in fancy words, but starvation had no euphemism. Hunger was a truth that could not be spun. Finally, it was their turn. Rostova did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She simply addressed the arbiter. "Arbiter Prime, the Principia does not dispute the facts presented by the Gilded Court. We dispute their interpretation. We dispute the very premise of their argument." She looked directly at the image of Proctor Varn. "The Gilded speak of gratitude. Let us speak of choice." A simple word, but it was the fulcrum on which the entire case would turn. "Nomos," she said calmly. "Display the energy audit of the Gilded collection vessel." A new set of data filled the screen. Kalen's meticulous work translated into the universal language of numbers. "This vessel," Rostova explained, "which provides these essential services, operates at a thermal efficiency of less than 40%. Over 60% of the energy it consumes, energy drawn directly from the Indar homeworld, is radiated away as waste heat. It is a monument to inefficiency." Proctor Varn's form shimmered. "Our methods are proprietary. Their complexity necessitates a certain energy expenditure." It was the arrogance of the monopolist. "Indeed," Rostova continued. "And that is the core of the issue. You have not provided the Indar with a tool. You have provided them with a service that only you can provide using a technology that you refuse to share at a price that you alone dictate." She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "This is not a contract. It is a dependency. A deliberately engineered dependency designed for one purpose: perpetual profit." The mask of benevolence was beginning to crack. She then had Nomos display the economic trajectory of a dozen other Gilded client worlds. The charts were all identical. A short-term gain followed by a long, slow, agonizing decline into ruin. The Gilded Court, does not uplift civilizations, Arbiter," Rostova stated, her voice ringing with conviction. "It strip-mines them. It uses the language of law and the pretense of benevolence to conduct the most ruthless form of conquest imaginable, a conquest of the balance sheet. The war was not for territory, but for the future itself. The fleet of humanity, this ship and its saint-like AI, teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." Nomos was the embodiment of that creed. It did not see good or evil, only input and output, cause and effect. And the effect of the Gilded Court was a trail of broken worlds, a silent testament to a flawed and predatory ideology. Its cold, logical presentation of the data was more damning than any impassioned speech Rostova could have made. The numbers did not lie. "Proctor Varn," Rostova asked, her voice deceptively soft, "what is the standard Gilded protocol when a client civilization develops the technology to replicate your services for themselves?" The proctor hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "It is not a situation that has arisen. Our clients appreciate the convenience and reliability of our continued administration." "So you have no exit strategy?" Rostova pressed. "No plan for a client to achieve true independence? The tithe is eternal." The silence that followed was an admission of guilt. Jian watched a slow smile spreading across his face. He finally understood. Ava wasn't just arguing against the Gilded's actions. She was putting their entire philosophy on trial. She was forcing them to defend the indefensible, to state out loud in a public forum that their goal was not partnership, but permanent subjugation. She was making them testify against themselves. It was a perfect legal trap. The youngest navigator on the bridge, a woman barely out of the academy, felt a shiver run down her spine. She had been taught that justice was a complex, messy affair. But here, watching the commander, it seemed so simple. It was about stripping away the lies, the justifications, the pretty words, until only the plain truth remained. The truth was that the Gilded were bullies, and the commanders was the one person on the playground brave enough to stand up to them. Justice was simply truth spoken aloud. "The Accord's sovereignty mandate is clear," Rostova concluded, her voice resonating with quiet power. "It guarantees every civilization the right to self-determination. The Gilded Court's model of imposed perpetual dependency is a fundamental violation of that right. They are not guardians. They are jailers, and the price of their protection is freedom itself." She had said her piece. The argument was made. The rest was up to the arbiter. The seed of doubt had been planted in the garden of law. The arbiter prime. A silent crystalline giant began to glow, its internal light shifting and changing as it processed the arguments. The corridor of law fell silent. The fate of the Inder, and perhaps countless other worlds, hung in the balance. Proctor Varn's image remained on screen, its polished surface seeming less reflective now, as if tarnished by the light of scrutiny. It had walked into the inquiry expecting a debate over the fine points of a contract. It had found itself in a trial for its very soul. A trial it was not prepared to win. Then, an escalation. Alarms blared across the Principia's bridge. Kalen shouted, "Commander! The Gilded vessel is powering up its main systems. It's deploying something, not weapons. It looks like a high-energy broadcast array." Rostova's blood ran cold. On screen, full magnification. The image shifted, zooming in on the golden ship. Panels were sliding open, revealing a complex network of emitters. "What are they doing?" Jian demanded. Nomos's voice was grim. "They are preparing to broadcast what their records call a compliance memorandum directly to the Inder population. It is a form of mimetic warfare designed to overwhelm a developing species' social cohesion by highlighting their inadequacies and reinforcing their dependency on the Gilded. It was a weapon that attacked the mind. It's an appeal to fear, Rostova realized. They're losing the legal argument, so they're going to terrorize the Inder into publicly validating the contract. They'll create a popular demand for their continued presence. This changed everything. The fight was no longer confined to the sterile confines of the corridor of law. It was about to spill over onto the planet below. This was a new kind of violence, silent and insidious. The first casualty of this war would be hope. A frantic voice crackled over the comms. It was Cathar. "Commander, our people, they are receiving a message. It speaks of our weakness, our failures. It shows us futures of famine and disaster, futures that can only be averted by the Gilded." Panic was rising in his voice. "They are showing us our own extinction and telling us it is our fault." Rostova's jaw clenched. This was a new low even for the Gilded. They were not just collectors, they were psychological torturers. They were poisoning the well of a civilization's soul. "Kalen, can we block that signal?" Rostova demanded. The tactical officer shook his head, his expression grim. "It's too powerful, Commander. It's blanketing the planet. We could try to jam it, but we risk frying their entire communication infrastructure. We'd be doing more harm than good." They were caught. They could not stop the broadcast without hurting the very people they were trying to protect. The Gilded had played their hand perfectly. It was a checkmate, or so it seemed. Rostova stood silent for a long moment, the chaos of the bridge swirling around her. Her initial plan to win in the court of law was sound, but the law was slow, and the Gilded were moving fast. She needed a new plan. She needed a way to fight back to counter this mimetic assault without firing a shot. The answer, when it came, was not born of anger, but of a cold, clear, and absolute certainty. The Gilded wanted to broadcast a message fine. Two could play at that game. "Nomos," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You have the complete energy audit of the Gilded vessel. You have the economic data from every world they have subjugated. You have the projections for the future of Inder under their care." The AI's light on the central console pulsed in affirmation. "All data is collated and accessible, Commander." Rostova turned to Kalen. "Can you piggyback a signal on their broadcast frequency? Not to block it, but to add to it." He would not fight their message. He would annotate it. Kalen's eyes lit up with understanding. "Yes, their carrier wave is strong, but it's unencrypted. We can splice our own data stream directly into it. The Inder will receive our signal alongside theirs." "Do it," Rostova ordered. "Nomos, prepare the data package. No commentary, no rhetoric, just the numbers. Itemize the Gilded's energy waste. Show the Inder how much of their own power is being vented into space. Juxtapose the Proctor's promises with the historical outcomes of their other clients. Let the Inder see the truth for themselves." She would arm them with knowledge, the only shield that could deflect a lie. On the planet below, a Inder family huddled in their dwelling, the Gilded's message of fear filling their minds. They saw images of failed harvests and dying stars. But then new information began to appear overlaid on the Gilded broadcast. It was simple, stark data. A chart showing the power drawn from their world and another showing how much of it was wasted. A timeline showing the prosperity of a dozen other worlds before the Gilded came and their poverty after. There were no voices, no commands, just numbers, just the cold, hard math of their own subjugation. "Truth is the anti-meme." Proctor Varn's transmission back on the main screen was sputtering with rage. "What is the meaning of this? You are interfering with a sanctioned communication." "We are not interfering. Rostova replied, her voice glacial. We are providing context. An informed populace is the cornerstone of any valid agreement. You want them to be grateful. Then let them see the full accounting of what you have given them and what you have taken. The ledger cuts both ways. The Arbiter Prime, which had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly pulsed with an intense, piercing light. Its logical voice filled the corridor of law, overriding all other transmissions. The Gilded Court has by its own actions introduced new evidence into this inquiry. The attempt to manipulate a party to a dispute while under adjudication is a grave procedural violation. This arbiter will now consider this act as evidence of intent. The Gilded had overplayed their hand. In their arrogance, they had shown the court exactly what they were. Their own actions had become the prosecution's best evidence. Rostova watched the proctor's shimmering form seem to dim its confidence, finally irrevocably broken. It had been so sure of its power, so certain of its methods. It had never faced an opponent who refused to play by its rules, who refused to be intimidated by its authority. It had never faced an opponent who believed with every fiber of their being that a balance sheet must in the end actually balance. For every debit, there must be a credit. Nomos. Rostova said, her voice now quiet, but filled with an iron resolve. The time for defense is over. Prepare our counterproposal. A full and public audit of the Gilded Court's entire history to be conducted by an independent third party, and prepare a bill. Jian looked at her confused. A bill for what? Rostova's gaze was fixed on the screen. For our services. We have provided the Inder with critical information counsel and technological assistance in countering a hostile mimetic attack. We will be sending the Gilded Court an invoice. It was time to mirror their own justice back at them. The bridge of the ESV Principia was silent, but it was a new kind of silence. It was not the tense quiet of waiting, but the focused calm of a plan coming together. The crew worked with a renewed sense of purpose. They were not just soldiers or sailors. They were guardians of a different kind of power. They were the auditors at the end of the universe, the ones who made sure the books were always eventually balanced. In this corner of the galaxy, at least the age of predatory gratitude was about to come to a very public and very expensive end. The reckoning was about to begin. On the observation deck, the young ensign who remembered her grandfather watched the data streams flowing between the Principia and the Gilded ship. She saw the lies being dismantled by facts, the fear being countered by transparency. This was what he had been talking about all those years ago. Justice wasn't a gift from on high. It was something you built line by line, number by number. It was a ledger patiently and accurately kept, and on that ledger a debt was finally being called due. The universe bent towards justice, but sometimes you had to provide the lever. The invoice appeared on the main screen, a document of elegant design and devastating intent. Nomos had replicated the Gilded Court's own aesthetic, all sweeping curves and golden filigree. But the content was pure, unadulterated human audacity. It listed in precise, unassailable terms the services rendered. Hostile mimetic counterintelligence. Read one line. Emergency data redaction and public education. Read another. The final line item was simply legal counsel in the matter of systemic coercion. The total calculated in Standard Accord energy credits was astronomical. It was the same bill sent to a different address. Proctor Varn's form, already diminished by the Arbiter's rebuke, seemed to recoil. Its voice, when it came, had lost its polished chime. It was now the grating sound of scraped metal. This is a mockery, an insult to the dignity of this proceeding. You cannot bill a party for resisting their lawful assistance. Rostova's response was ice. You established the principle, Proctor. Unsolicited aid, in your view, creates a debt. We provided unsolicited aid to the Inder by protecting them from your psychological attack. By your own logic, a debt has been incurred. She had turned their philosophy into a cage and locked them inside. Jian let out a low whistle of admiration. It was a move of breathtaking legal jujitsu. The Gilded could not refute the bill without refuting the very foundation of their empire. To argue that this unsolicited aid did not create a debt would be to admit that their unsolicited aid created no debt. They were trapped. Their every possible objection would only serve to further dismantle their own case. The argument had become a perfect, self-consuming circle. The Arbiter Prime pulsed a cool blue light. The human counterclaim is noted. It is structurally consistent with the Gilded Court's own presented framework. This arbiter will take the matter of reciprocal obligation under advisement. The noncommittal response was in itself a stunning victory. The arbiter had acknowledged the validity of the comparison. It had placed the Gilded's invoice and Rostova's on the same legal footing. In the cold calculus of the law, they were now equals. A debt was a debt. The only question was who owed whom. A small Inder technician monitoring the Accord feed from a makeshift command center on her homeworld began to laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. She translated the proceedings for her leaders, her voice shaking with emotion. The humans were not just fighting for them. They were fighting like them, using the enemy's own weight against it. They had found the single pressure point in the Gilded Court's armor and were now pressing with the force of a star. For the first time in generations, the YNDR felt the leverage shift, but the Gilded were not so easily defeated. Their empire was not built on logic alone, but on the application of power. A new alert flashed on Kalen's console, his face hardening as he read the incoming data. "Commander, the Gilded vessel is on the move. It's not approaching us. It's heading for Inder's primary orbital refinery station Epsilon." Jian swore under his breath. "They're going to ignore the inquiry. They're going to take their payment in feet." This was the next escalation. The Gilded were abandoning the pretense of law and resorting to simple, brutal repossession. The mask was off. The pirate was beneath. "They are citing Accord Provision 74.3, Nomos reported calmly. "The right of a creditor to secure assets against a pending debt in cases of demonstrable flight risk or non-compliance. They are classifying the Inder's participation in this inquiry as non-compliance." Rostova's eyes narrowed. It was a flimsy legal pretext, but it gave them just enough cover. They were daring her to intervene, to fire the first shot, and become the aggressor in the eyes of the Accord. They were trying to goad her into a war they knew she couldn't win. "Helm lay in an intercept course," Rostova commanded. "Match their velocity and place the Principia directly between their vessel and Station Epsilon. Do not under any circumstances power up weapon systems. Kalen broadcast on all Accord channels. Declare our intentions publicly. We are moving to shield a civilian installation from unlawful seizure pending the Arbiter's final ruling." She would not take their bait. She would not meet force with force. She would meet it with positioning. The Principia was faster, more agile than the bulky, Gilded collection ship. It slid into place with practiced ease, a gray shield of human resolve standing before the fragile Inder station. On the main screen, the golden vessel loomed its ornate form, a stark contrast to the utilitarian bulk of the human ship. It did not slow down. "Commander Telte," Kalen said, his voice tight. "They are not deviating. Collision course in 90 seconds. The air on the bridge grew thick with tension. The Gilded were calling her bluff. They were willing to trade paint to make a point. "Hold your position," Rostova ordered, her knuckles white where she gripped the command chair. Nomos are our structural integrity fields at maximum. Affirmative, Commander. However, a collision at this velocity will still result in significant outer hull damage. A cost of victory. She had known it was coming. To prove their resolve, they had to be willing to bleed for it. A principle wasn't a principle until you were willing to pay for it. A line drawn in the stars must be held. On Station Epsilon, the Inder crew watched the drama unfold in stunned silence. The human ship, a vessel full of strangers from a world they had never seen, was placing itself in harm's way for them. They saw the gilded ship grow larger and larger, a golden specter of death. They braced for the impact, for the explosion that would end their world's hope. But they did not feel fear. They felt a strange, fierce pride. They were not alone. Someone was finally truly on their side. Solidarity was a shield of its own. At the last possible second, the gilded ship veered off. Its engines flared, pushing it into a high orbit away from the station. A collective sigh of relief went through the Principia's bridge. The Gilded had blinked. They were willing to be bullies, but they were not willing to be seen as aggressors in a direct physical confrontation that was being broadcast live to the entire Accord. Their power relied on the illusion of legality, an illusion that a direct assault on a neutral vessel would shatter completely. Their brutality had its limits, and those limits were defined by public opinion. The Arbiter Prime's voice boomed across the comms, no longer calm or measured. It was infused with a cold, crystalline fury. Proctor Varn, your actions constitute a direct contempt of this inquiry. You have attempted to subvert this proceeding through mimetic warfare and now through physical intimidation. This corridor of law is hereby escalated to a full public tribunal of the Accord Quorum. Your presence and your testimony are compelled. The game had changed. The Gilded were no longer the plaintiff. They were the defendant. The tribunal was a different beast entirely. The singular logical mind of the arbiter was now joined by a quorum of 100 different species, 1,000 different legal philosophies. But they had all seen the same evidence. They had seen the Gilded's arguments, their mimetic attack, and their blatant attempt at intimidation. Rostova had not needed to convince them of the Gilded's malice. The Gilded had done that for her. All she had to do now was deliver the final blow. Proctor Varn. Rostova began, her voice echoing in the vast virtual chamber of the tribunal. Let us speak of your mission. You call it benevolent intervention. You claim to uplift civilizations. Let us examine the results of this uplift. One by one, Nomos projected the histories of Gilded client worlds onto the main screen. The pattern was always the same, a brief spike in technology, a flood of Gilded services, and then a long, slow spiral into economic and social collapse. Worlds turned to dust, all in the name of gratitude. Is this success, Proctor? Rostova asked, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a dozen dead civilizations. Is the complete subjugation and impoverishment of a species the intended outcome of your benevolence, or is it merely an unfortunate but consistent side effect? The proctor shimmered, its usual composure gone. The variables are complex. Some species lack the fortitude to manage the opportunities we provide. The failure is theirs, not ours. It was the classic excuse of the abuser. It was your own fault, you made me hurt you. The blame was always shifted downstream. A representative from the Cygnian Confederacy, a species known for its fierce independence, spoke up, its voice a series of resonant clicks. The human commander raises a valid point. The Gilded Court's model seems to produce only one outcome dependency. Is there any provision, any path for a client to graduate from your services and achieve true autonomy? Autonomy is a relative concept, the proctor deflected. We provide stability. We provide security. In a dangerous galaxy that is a gift beyond price. A cage. No matter how gilded, is still a cage. Rostova saw her opening. So you are not a service provider. You are a government. A self-appointed, unaccountable government that imposes its rule on other sovereign peoples and forces them to pay for the privilege. Is that an accurate summary of your business model? The directness of the question stunned the proctor into silence. To agree would be to admit to being a conqueror. To disagree would be to undermine its entire justification for the tithe. The trap had been sprung and the proctor was caught in its teeth. The truth once spoken could not be unheard. Now came the final piece of the puzzle. The mirror, the ledger, the return of costs. The problem, Rostova continued, addressing the full quorum, is not the idea of helping other species. It is the method. A method based on inefficiency, dependency, and coercion is not benevolence. It is predation. We propose a new standard, a simple mathematical principle to be enshrined in accord law. We call it the reciprocity calculus. It was time to rewrite the rules. Nomos filled the screen with a simple, elegant equation. It was a cost-benefit analysis, but with a crucial twist. The reciprocity calculus states that any unsolicited intervention must be demonstrably energy positive for the recipient within a single generation. Rostova explained. The intervener must prove with verifiable data that their aid will generate more usable energy resources and economic output for the client than the cost of the aid itself. Furthermore, all technology provided must be accompanied by a clear, unencumbered path to independent replication. No more black boxes, no more eternal debts. The chamber erupted in a murmur of 100 different languages. This was a radical idea. It shifted the burden of proof from the recipient to the provider. It made helping a quantifiable, auditable act, not a vague philosophical justification for conquest. It turned benevolence from a slogan into a mathematical certainty. It replaced faith with math. This is absurd, the proctor finally managed to splutter. It would make our work impossible. No, Rostova countered calmly. It would make your current methods impossible. It would force you to efficient. It would force you to actually empower your clients, not just indebt them. It would force you to ask them how to fish, instead of selling them fish at a price that costs them their boat, their house, and their future. The simple truth of it was undeniable. And then the final maneuver. Nomos, Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with authority. Execute Accord Accounting Protocol 9, the mirror ledger. On the public accord ledger visible to every member of the quorum, a new entry began to form. Nomos, with the cold, irrefutable precision of a machine, began to process the data from the Inder system. It calculated the total energy drawn from the planet by the gilded vessel. Then it subtracted the quantifiable value of the services rendered, the solar mitigation, the asteroid defense. Finally, it added back the energy credits for the 60% of power that Kalen's audit had proven was wasted. A debt was being recalculated in the light of day. The numbers on the public ledger shifted. The massive debt owed by the Inder began to shrink. Then it vanished. Then, shockingly, it flipped. The Gilded Court's name moved from the creditor column to the debtor column. According to the impartial math accounting for gross inefficiency and waste, the Gilded owed the Inder. We are filing a formal request for restitution on behalf of the Inder people, Rostova announced to the stunned tribunal. All tithes collected to date are to be considered overpayment on a service that was never rendered efficiently. We expect a full refund, with interest. The accountants had been audited. Proctor Varn simply vanished. Its transmission cut out its place in the virtual chamber empty. There was nothing left to say. Its arguments were ashes. Its methods were exposed. Its philosophy was bankrupt, both morally and now literally. The Gilded Court, the financial empire that had terrorized a dozen worlds, had been brought down not by a fleet of warships, but by a single perfectly calculated invoice. The pen was mightier than the sword, but the calculator was mightier than both. The tribunal's verdict was swift and unanimous. The gratitude tithe was outlawed, declared a predatory practice in violation of the sovereignty mandate. The Gilded Court's assets were frozen, its charter suspended, pending a full Accord-supervised audit of all its past and present operations. The reciprocity calculus was adopted into the core principles of Accord law. A precedent had been set. The age of weaponized benevolence was over. The law had grown teeth. The bridge of the Principia was quiet. The main screen now showed the golden gilded vessel no longer a predator, but a prisoner in its own orbit, waiting for an Accord marshal to arrive. Gian clapped Rostova on the shoulder, a wide grin on his face. "Eva, that was—" He couldn't find the words. "That was accounting." She finished for him, a small, tired smile on her own face. The victory was total, but it was not without its price. The outer hull of the Principia was scored and buckled from the close pass, a physical reminder of the risk they had taken. The crew was exhausted, pushed to their mental and emotional limits by the weeks of tension. A win was still a fight, and every fight left its scars. The scales of justice rarely balance without blood or treasure. A message came in from Cathar. It was a simple message of thanks from his people. He told Rostova that the children on Indar were already learning a new word in their language, a word borrowed from the strange, stubborn humans who had come to their aid. The word was Rostova, and it meant one who balances the books. The second cost of victory was a weight of a different kind, the burden of becoming a symbol. She had not sought to be a savior, only a commander doing her duty. But now her name and the name of humanity would be tied to this precedent forever. They had come to observe and had ended up redefining the galaxy's moral compass. Rostova walked to the forward viewport, looking down at the now unthreatened world of the Indar. The single yellow sun shone on a planet that was for the first time in a long time its own. The victory felt clean but heavy. It was earned not through destruction, but through relentless, unyielding reason. They had not broken their enemy. They had simply forced their enemy to confront the brokenness within themselves. This was the human way. Not to conquer, but to correct. Not to punish, but to prove. The public ledger entry on her console blinked its status, updated from pending to confirmed. The Gilded Court's debt to the Indar was now enshrined in Accord law, an unbreakable promise written in the common language of mathematics. The mirror arrays of the Accord's justice system, which had for so long been angled to favor the powerful, had been tilted just slightly back toward the light. This is how you win a war without firing a shot. You don't raise a sword, you raise a standard. A standard of evidence, of efficiency, of simple, honest math. You force the darkness to account for itself in the light, and you trust that the truth once revealed is a weapon that can never be defeated. You show them the ledger, you show them the cost, and you send them the bill for their own sins. The books are balanced.